Hello and welcome to another episode of This Week in Goldmaking, presented by darkshorecapital. It's currently September 17th, 2018. Got some big changes this week to the market update. I've removed quite a few items and added some more diverse items to the spread. Basically, I realized that a lot of what we were tracking previously was a bit redundant, and I wanted to kind of get a bit more of a broad range as opposed to like just crafting things. So we've removed some of the crafting stuff, left the ones that I just kind of deemed the most important. We can have a discussion about that if you think that that was incorrect. But I've also added a couple BoEs, mostly because that's a very relevant market for myself. So we're going to keep track of the T-Boos, the new T-Boos, I should say, and the Gnarled Mood Ring. T-Boos, just because I thought it was kind of an interesting one. I don't know if that's necessarily 100% correct. Maybe we can have a little bit of discussion and see if there might be a better one. But the Mood Ring I'm very confident in, since it is pure haste, and it seems like just about everybody this expansion needs more haste. You also will notice down at the bottom I've added a couple lines which I think will be very interesting to track over the course of this expansion. The first is the rough amount that you would have to pay to get a group to carry you through what I'm calling a max level mythic keystone. So whatever the highest rank key to get the maximum reward from your weekly chest. Currently that's a plus 10. And as you can see from what I've gathered so far, and these are really rough numbers, it's about 450,000 on the US, about 650,000 on the EU side of things. But so actually, with that in mind, we're also going to try and track the head of the curve prices as well, which are currently about 1.5 million. If any of you guys or gals out there can send me any of this data, it would be most helpful. Just please include the price, obviously, what region you're on, and any other details you might be able to include, like server, potentially what guild or group is selling. I might be interested in that stuff as well. So if you can help out with that, I think it'll be very interesting to track that data point in the future. Otherwise, I axed a couple of the other older crafting materials as well. Spirit of Harmony has been a requested one for a while, and that kind of covers actually quite a few things. There's actually an argument that Spirit of Harmony sort of covers Sky Golems as well. However, as you can see, the percent changes of the Sky Golem vary quite drastically from the percent changes of the Spirit of Harmony. So maybe not quite a one-to-one like I originally thought, but nonetheless, it is there and it is useful for a lot of things. Not a huge week as far as gold making news goes, at least that I was able to recall or find. There's been some weird stuff happening with Warfronts. I am kind of coming back a little bit on whether or not they're really going to be that profitable. I do have to admit that I still haven't really fully comprehended what the purpose of the turn-ins are. I've heard that it's not actually required to get access to your Warfront. It just kind of happens after a certain period of time. So I don't really know what the deal is with that. In my experience with Warfront from as a player standpoint is I kind of just showed up and got some free gear, so I didn't really have to do anything for that. So maybe it's not that big a deal, actually. I don't know. I'm gonna have to do some more looking in on that one. And the only other thing that is kind of tangentially related to gold making, there's been a lot of complaints, criticisms, critiquing of Battle for Azeroth and the general direction of the game. And while this isn't directly related to gold making, in order to make gold, you generally have to have people to buy your items. And if there's nobody playing the game, you have nobody to sell to. So, maybe something to keep in mind. I don't think it's really that big a factor yet. I doubt we're going to see a mass exodus of sorts of players, but, maybe just something to keep in the back of your mind. May or may not play into how you make decisions going forward. All right, then I think this is probably going to be the last part in the Buy Flasks Now series that I've been doing. As you can see, I've changed the titles to Do Not Buy Flasks Now, since the honeymoon period of pre-raid cheap flasks and potions have certainly disappeared, and we're kind of going to wrap this one up. I do believe that there is still money to be made with Alchemy, as with any profession, in the current expansion at the very least. And we'll probably go into this a little bit more detail once I have a chance to get my setup going. But I will say that during Legion content, I was able to unlock rank 3s of all the relevant potions and flasks at a time when herbs were fairly cheap, and then use those recipes to just make a ton of gold crafting flasks. Despite what may be happening right this minute, flasks and potions will wind up being profitable. I'm predicting. I should clarify that fact with that. That's a prediction. It's not a terribly bold prediction, but it is a prediction nonetheless. It's very likely that'll happen. And as long as you can get cheap herbs, you can always make a profit. So overall, I just want to kind of wrap this one up. Some thoughts. Obviously, I did make plenty of gold, as we saw on last week's slide, and I could have done a much better job of being more active with canceling and reposting of the flasks and potions that I had during kind of the high traffic pre-raid time frames, kind of the evenings in the early parts of the week. That's something I just didn't have a chance to do this time around. But nonetheless, I still made plenty of gold, and I think that this is definitely worthwhile. But I did get a bit of the realism shock come in when not everything was just selling immediately. So I guess it is a little bit of caution. You know, this is a risk. There's still risk involved, and you just have to be aware of what it is and be diligent about getting your items up in the auction house to sell them. The feature for this week is going to be a slide titled BFA BoE Flipping. And this is something I've been very excited to start doing. And now that I've raised a significant amount of capital, or enough capital, on the various different servers that I'm doing gold making pursuits on, I can start actually doing this, which is exciting. So I'm just going to go over this from the ground up. What is the point of flipping BoEs? What is the actual value that we're generating here? And this might not be a terribly obvious one, and I'll go into a little bit of detail to explain it, but basically you are creating a market for people to buy and sell bind on equip items. Now, imagine this scenario. I think this illustrates it very well. You have a raider who last week was raiding and got a BoE drop, and very excited about that. Awesome. And maybe he got busy during the week. Didn't have time to get his flasks or potions for the upcoming week's raid. So it's kind of panic mode. He needs to get money for his flasks right now. So instead of posting up the crazy BoE item that he got for 100k, which is generally worth on the market, he just needs that money right now. So he posted up for 50k. Now, without people flipping BoEs, that would just sit there and never be bought. So by being willing to put the capital up to purchase the cheaper items now, with the promise of a return in the future, of course, you're enabling others to quickly turn their otherwise less liquid items into fast cash, which they can then use for whatever needs they have. So it sounds a little shady, I know, but trust me, this is a good thing. This is definitely a good thing. Okay, so let's get into a little bit of the mechanics behind it. So the biggest thing to keep in mind with flipping BoEs is something I've actually gone over in a video more in depth in the past, is maximizing your margin of safety. Now that's a fancy way of saying buy things that are cheap. If something's 50% off, if you go to the store and something's 50% off, that's a good deal. Like that's just the way it is. So the same thing happens with these BoEs, right? Like you have Johnny Raider over here who needs money right now for his flask, so he puts his BoE up for 50% of its market value, and you buy it up. And then you might have to wait somewhere between a week and a month to sell it, but you're pretty happy because you just made 100% profit. So, and that's the other thing with buying things cheap is if the value does fluctuate down a lot, you're okay, because even if it drops 50%, you can still just sell it and make your money back, which obviously that's not what you want, but you're not losing money, which is a big deal. Okay, so let's go over what factors that I personally use and look at when determining if something's a good buy. So availability, that's how many of the item is posted on the auction house. The price, obviously, the market price and the region market price are important things to consider. Things like sockets are incredibly powerful this expansion. There are some pieces of gear that have sockets on them where the socket is almost as much of a secondary stat as the lesser of the two secondary stats. Like you have 60 haste on the item and you socket for 40 haste. That's just crazy. Again, stats are important. Haste, as I mentioned earlier in the video, is very desirable for a lot of classes at the moment. Then armor and weapon type are also an important thing to consider. You could also be looking at item levels. This is a bit more of a nuanced thing, but it is important to pay attention to that stuff as well. And there's a couple other items here, but before we get into those, I do want to hop over and just kind of illustrate my point a little bit with just kind of looking at a typical shopping scan. So I have these strings that I use to search for BoEs currently, and I'll link them in the video description below. They're very straightforward. So the very first thing you may or may not notice here, let me expand this out a little bit, is the quantity of a lot of these items is very high, especially down here. And that's a big red flag. Like there's 24 spellbound specimen handlers, which is not great because I think I have some of these sitting in my bags. And actually, we'll just dive right into it, right? So one of the reasons this is not, there's so many of these up here, is it's heavily weighted toward versatility. And if you know anything about casters, casters just don't care about versatility. I'm pretty sure universally the worst stat you could have as a caster. So, that explains why there's so many, and it explains why you probably shouldn't be purchasing these. This was a mistake I made, clearly. There's another one up on the auction house, I believe. Other things to look at. So, I mentioned armor type. I'm sure some of these down here are male. Male in combination with being the armor type with the fewest classes. There's only 2 classes that use male armor. And one of them currently, shamans, are really not doing too good. So and you can even see this. This is kind of crazy. This piece has a socket. It's got haste, and it's at 29% the region market value. But I'm still a little hesitant to purchase it. So actually, let's kind of get a little bit deeper into this. There's another one here at the same item level, 360, and it's just a little bit more. So I don't know. This one actually, I would definitely consider purchasing this, and it's only 65,000 gold, which, even if the market price, according to Trade Skill Master, which is about 100,000 right now, were to drop by 50%, that's not even losing that much. Sockets, I don't know. It's kind of a tough call. Again, the male is a pretty big factor here, and the fact that there's so many other pieces of very similar eye level that are around the same price. I think this probably was a misprice, but I don't know. Again, this is really tough. Like the socket also makes it attractive, but we're getting kind of a bit deep in the weeds. So the things that I typically like to look for are posts with very few items. So this one only has 4. So I would definitely expand this one and take a look and see what the prices are like. These are all fairly close in 350, 355 gear. It's leather, it's got haste, it's fairly attractive. This might actually not be a terrible target to purchase and then relist for a decent profit. The things here that always catch my eyes, like this one is the only item that's listed here, which can be good and it can be bad, right? So if you buy it and relist it for, say, double, put it up for 240,000 gold, well, if somebody needs their leather feet with crit and haste on them, then you're the only option. But at the same time, if other people have these in their inventory, say that they just are sitting in the mailbox while they wait to be reposted, or somebody goes out and farms a bunch, I don't know, you could get burned by that one too, especially since it's at an 84% region market value. So at best, if a bunch of other items come on the market, you could lose money, especially if when you factor in auction house cuts and things like that. So that's just a quick kind of look into just a little bit of my thought process when I go about purchasing these things. Let's get back over to the slides. The other 2 things that are related to server that I wanted to point out, I think are very important, are your server's population and also what kind of server you're on, right? So in my experience, high population servers generally have a much higher supply of items, as evidenced by the large amount here. Proudmoore is one of the highest population servers in the US. And that can lead to higher liquidity, but it can also lead to a lot more competition. The prices of these things get driven down like crazy. You had like this male item we were looking at is 29% market value, and I'm not just snatching it up. Like there's still reason to not do that. I mean, I probably should, but I'm very conservative when it comes to this type of stuff. Medium population servers, there's obviously less supply, and then the low population servers is even fewer supply. And as your server size decreases, the prices of these things tend to increase because it's just basic laws of supply and demand. So it's something to keep in mind. But then again, with those lower population servers, there's fewer people there to buy them. So it can be a trade-off. It can be riskier. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is what kind of server you're on, right? If your server has a bunch of raiding guilds that may or may not be needing these bind unequip epics, that's something to keep in mind, because if there's a ton of raiders that need to boost their item level up, or maybe have their alts that need to boost their item level up, you can take advantage of that. All right, so let's also talk about selling BoEs. So obviously the auction house is going to be your main avenue of getting your items out there to be bought. But I will also remind everyone that Trade Chat, despite the sometimes vast amount of chaff to wade through, is still an incredibly valuable resource, both for selling and purchasing. I always try and just keep an eye out for the purple links when I'm doing my auction house posting. And if the price is right, I usually tend to kind of lowball people on things, because that's just the price that I'm willing to pay, and there's really no harm in that. The worst thing they can do is say no. But yeah, oftentimes you can strike a deal, and don't be afraid to bargain with people, both for buying and selling. Just always make sure that you're giving yourself as big a margin of safety as you possibly can, and making a profit when you make sales. The other two things I want to talk about, so TSM operations versus posting manually. There was a horror story on, I believe it was the WoW Economy subreddit last week. Somebody had set up some TSM operations for selling their BoEs that had gone terribly wrong due to some kind of miscommunication on the add-ons part, or Blizzard's part. I'm not sure exactly what the cause was of the item level of the item. So they wound up losing millions of gold as a result of having the wrong item level for their posting strings. Yeah, obviously that's no good, and a big reason why posting manually has some advantages. You have direct control over every single price that you put up there, and it's a lot less prone to errors like that. I mean, there's still obviously human error that can happen, but that can happen with just about anything. One thing I will note about posting manually, Tradesco Master 4 does have the feature, once again, to post from the shopping view. However, it will only do so if there's another item that matches the one you're trying to post exactly. And I mean exactly, like same item level, same LFR versus heroic versus normal, same Warforged, same sockets, same tertiaries. It's all got to be exactly the same. You could have the same item level item, but one's from heroic and one's from normal. Won't post it up there. So for that, I would definitely recommend having access to Auctionator, as it has a incredibly simple interface and makes it very easy to post things as you would like. Then lastly, I want to talk about risk tolerance. Kind of touched on this a little bit with the maximizing of your margin of safety, but it's important to just kind of understand, what you're willing to risk. For me, the thing that really drives my risk taking the most in the game is wanting to make sure I have enough gold to pay for WoW tokens for the foreseeable future. And there's definitely a lot more to be talked about when it comes to the topic of risk tolerance, and that will be saved for a future video, of course. But I did want to touch on it and make sure that the stuff does carry risk with it, and just be aware of that and know what your tolerance is. All right, let's move on to Q&A. Just a few quick ones today. Old world mats that are still in demand, ? There's plenty, just off the top of my head. Ghost Iron Ore, Spirits of Harmony, various crafted stuff. It's kind of hard to nail them down, but I'm always buying old world stuff for transmog crafting. Corium Ore perhaps comes to mind. A big one, actually, that I like to put to say whenever these questions come up are primals from Burning Crusade. Those things are a pain to acquire. You can farm them, but man, it's a slow going because they drop in the component moats and just very small amounts at a time. Next question, is a deflation coming? Probably, but as with any forward-looking statements, past performances do not guarantee future returns, so keep that in mind. Historically, yes, prices generally go down as the expansions progress because more and more supply comes. And the demand can fluctuate based on a number of different factors. But yeah, probably, but who knows? we'll just have to see. Lastly, how to calculate alchemy crafting costs with proc chance in the equation. So Tradesco Master does not have this built into the crafted values. To my knowledge, I don't think they added that with TSM4. And there are definitely ways to get around this, however. So the way that I prefer to do, and the way that I did when I was doing all the Legion alchemy stuff, is actually to incorporate it into my posting operations. So you can use the proc rate. I believe it's 1.42 as kind of your. You can basically replicate the crafting cost within your auctioning operations, just to make sure that based on your herb purchase price, you're never going to lose money with the proc rates factored in. And I don't want to get into the complicated math of this right now, but suffice to say that I like to incorporate it into the auctioning operation because I think that's where it's closest to relevant. There are other ways to get around it too, but I'm answering this question how I would, so that's what I would do. Do it in the posting operations. All right, so lastly, before we wrap up for today, I know that last week's video was a little on the shorter side, I think around 6 minutes. Yeah, the whole discussion of like long form versus short form versus being concise versus being a little more verbose about things. My goal is to just always have relevant information and not to kind of blab on forever about random topics that aren't interesting or useful. So I'm going to try and keep it tight in that regard, but I'd love to hear any feedback if you guys like the longer videos or if you like the shorter videos. I do try and post any of my stream VODs on the YouTube channel, which are a bit more long form, kind of really getting into the nitty gritty of certain things when it comes up. So if you like to just have something on in the background, the stream VODs are a great option for that. And I do try and keep the weekly wrap-up videos from getting too rambly. So I'm going to actually wrap this particular discussion up on that note. And as usual, if you have any questions, you can leave a comment on the YouTube video below. You can send me a tweet at darkshorecap, or you can send me an email, darkshorecapital@gmail.com. And that's going to do it for this week. Thank you all so much for watching. For the gold.